I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am. My name is Jenna, and until recently, I thought I had a pretty good life. I worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm, lived in a comfortable apartment in the suburbs, and had what I believed was a solid marriage to Mark, my husband of 10 years. Most importantly, we had our beautiful daughter, Sarah, who was the light of our lives. Mark and I met in college. He was the charming business major who always knew exactly what to say, and I was the quiet girl who preferred numbers to people. Somehow, we clicked. After graduation, we both landed decent jobs, got married, and started building our life together. When Sarah came along 2 years later, everything felt perfect. I can still remember the day everything changed. It was a regular Tuesday evening in March. Sarah, 8 at the time, was already in bed, and Mark and I were sitting at our kitchen table. He had that look on his face, the one that said he had something heavy on his mind. "Jenna, we need to talk," he said, fidgeting with his coffee mug. I knew right then that whatever was coming wasn't good. "What's wrong?" I asked, though part of me already knew. There had been signs, late nights at work, mysterious phone calls, the emotional distance that had been growing between us. He took a deep breath. "I've met someone else." Those 4 words hit me like a punch to the gut. Her name was Rebecca, he told me. She worked in his department. They'd been seeing each other for months. "I'm sorry," he said, as if that made everything okay. "I never meant for this to happen, but I think I'm in love with her." I sat there, numb, as he continued talking about how we'd grown apart and how Rebecca understood him in ways I never could. All I could think about was Sarah, sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. The next few weeks were a blur of mediation sessions and painful conversations. We agreed to keep things civil for Sarah's sake. In the end, I got our apartment, and Mark got the car and yacht, toys I never cared much about anyway. He agreed to pay generous child support, and we worked out a custody arrangement where Sarah would live primarily with me but spend regular time with her father. "I know I've hurt you," Mark said during our final mediation session, "but I want to do right by Sarah." I just nodded. What else could I say? The man I'd loved for a decade had betrayed me, but he was still Sarah's father. For her sake, I had to find a way to co-parent with him, to push aside my own hurt and anger. A year passed like a blur of workdays, homework help, and adjusting to our new routine. Sarah had just turned 9, and I was finally starting to feel like I had my feet under me again. Then came the wedding invitation, not for me, of course, but for Sarah. Mark was marrying Rebecca. They'd bought a house together, or rather, they were moving into her house, a sprawling 2-story in the nice part of town with a manicured lawn and a 3-car garage. The kind of place that screamed successful couple. The morning of the wedding, I helped Sarah get ready. She wore a pale blue dress we'd picked out together, and I braided her hair the way she liked it. "Are you sure you're okay with me going, Mom?" she asked, watching me in the mirror as I pinned back a stray strand. "Of course I am, sweetheart," I replied, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "She's going to be your stepmother. It's important that you two have a good relationship. But aren't you sad?" I turned her around to face me. "Listen to me, Sarah. What happened between your dad and me is grown-up stuff. It has nothing to do with you. I want you to have a good relationship with both your dad and Rebecca. No taking sides, okay?" She hugged me tight. "You're the best mom ever." Mark picked her up in his new SUV, and I spent the day cleaning the apartment and definitely not thinking about the wedding. When Sarah came home that night, she was full of stories about the ceremony, the cake, and the big house where she'd have her own room for visits. Life went on. I threw myself into work and taking care of Sarah. We developed our own little routines: Tuesday night movies, Saturday morning pancakes, long walks in the park on Sundays. Sarah split her time between our apartment and Mark's house, and things were okay. Not great, but okay. Then one day, Sarah came bouncing through the door after a weekend at her dad's, practically bursting with news. "Mom, guess what?" she exclaimed, dropping her backpack by the door. Rebecca's pregnant. I'm going to have a little brother or sister. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut, but I kept my face neutral. Really? That's big news. Yeah, you can already see her belly a little bit. Dad's super excited. He kept talking about turning the guest room into a nursery. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. All I could think was, please, don't let this change how he treats Sarah. Don't let her become the forgotten first child. A month later, Sarah came home early from what was supposed to be a week-long stay at her dad's. She looked frustrated as she dragged her suitcase through the door. Rebecca's really sick, she explained, flopping onto the couch. She keeps throwing up and getting mad at everything. The smell of Dad's coffee made her cry this morning, and she said my laugh was too loud. So she asked if I could come home early. I sat down next to her, running my hand over her hair. That happens sometimes when women are pregnant. Their hormones make them extra sensitive to everything. I understood pregnancy symptoms all too well, remembering my own months of morning sickness when I was carrying Sarah. So I couldn't really blame Rebecca for being overwhelmed. A couple of weeks after Sarah's early return, Mark pulled up in front of our apartment to pick her up for another visit. I watched from the window as Sarah ran down to his car, her backpack bouncing against her back. Everything seemed normal enough. During the next 2 weeks, I called Sarah every evening. Our conversations were brief but reassuring. "Everything's good, Mom," she'd say. "We had pizza for dinner, or Dad's teaching me to play chess." When she finally came home, though, something seemed off. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before, and she moved more slowly than usual, like she was carrying a weight on her shoulders. "Honey, are you okay?" I asked, helping her unpack her bag. "You look tired." "Oh, I'm fine," she said, waving off my concern. "I've just been helping Rebecca around the house a bit. You know, cleaning and stuff. She can't do much right now, because of the baby. I even learned how to make spaghetti." My heart swelled with pride. I'd always tried to teach Sarah to be kind and helpful to others. "That's really sweet of you, honey," I said, giving her a hug. "I'm proud of you for helping out." Life went back to normal for a few weeks, until one evening when my phone rang. It was Mark. "Hey, Jenna," he said, his voice careful and measured. "I need to ask you a favor." According to our custody agreement, Sarah was supposed to spend the next month with me, but Mark had other ideas. "Would it be okay if Sarah stayed with us instead?" he asked. She and Rebecca have really been bonding lately. Sarah's been such a help around the house, and they've gotten really close. I pressed my lips together, considering. Let me ask Sarah what she wants. I called Sarah to the phone, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice as she listened to her father's request. But then Mark's tone changed, becoming excited. "Oh, and sweetheart, I've got a surprise for you," he said. "I just picked up that new computer game you've been talking about. The one with the dragons." "Mom, can I go?" Sarah turned to me, her eyes shining. "Please?" What could I say? Of course, if that's what you want. The next 2 weeks passed quietly. Mark took care of all the school runs, and Sarah seemed to be settling into a routine at their house. She sent me regular updates, photos of herself cooking in their fancy kitchen, shots of her playing her new game, pictures of her lounging on their plush living room couch. Everything looked fine on the surface. Still, something nagged at the back of my mind. Something about those photos felt staged. But I pushed the thought away. I was probably just being paranoid, letting my own feelings about Mark and Rebecca cloud my judgment. Sarah seemed happy enough in the pictures, and that's what mattered, right? When Sarah finally came home after that week, I barely recognized my own daughter. Her face was drawn and pale, with dark circles under her eyes that no 12-year-old should have. Her shoulders slumped as if she'd been carrying bricks. "Sarah, honey, what's wrong?" I asked, reaching for her. She just waved me off weakly. "I'm really tired, Mom. Can I go to bed?" Don't you want dinner first? But she was already dragging herself to her room. She didn't even change into her pajamas, just collapsed onto her bed and was out like a light. Something was very wrong. I waited until she was sound asleep before calling Mark. "What's going on over there?" I demanded. "Sarah looks completely exhausted." "Oh, here we go," Mark sighed. I could practically hear him rolling his eyes. "You're exaggerating, Jenna, as usual." "Exaggerating? Have you seen our daughter? She looks like she hasn't slept in days. She helped Rebecca with some housework. She's just not used to doing chores, probably because someone spoils her at home." The jab stung, but I pressed on. "This isn't about me, Mark. Something's not right." "She's fine," he insisted. "Kids today are so soft. A little work never hurt anyone. She'll adjust." I didn't sleep well that night, waiting for Sarah to wake up. When she finally emerged from her room the next afternoon, I sat her down at the kitchen table and made her favorite breakfast for lunch, chocolate chip pancakes. "Sweetie," I said, sliding a plate in front of her, "I need you to tell me what's really going on at your dad's house." Sarah pushed the pancakes around with her fork, not meeting my eyes. "It's nothing." "Sarah, please. I can see how tired you are. You can tell me anything, you know that." She was quiet for a long moment, then the words started tumbling out. "Rebecca doesn't do anything anymore. She says she can't because of the baby, but Mom, she makes me do everything. I have to clean the whole house, vacuum, dust, mop, everything. I have to cook too. She makes me cut up vegetables and use the stove, even though it scares me." My hands clenched into fists under the table. "What about relaxing? Don't you get any time to yourself?" Sarah's lower lip trembled. "I tried to watch TV after cleaning one day, but Rebecca said the noise gave her a headache. She just turned it off and told me to go to my room and be quiet. She says I laugh too loud and walk too heavy and... I was already pulling out my phone, dialing Mark's number. He answered on the fourth ring. "What now, Jenna? What now? How about explaining why our daughter is being treated like Cinderella in your house?" My voice shook with anger. "She's 12 years old, Mark. She shouldn't be cooking and cleaning an entire house." "Sarah's exaggerating," he said dismissively. "Rebecca just asked for a little help, and we turned down the TV because it was too loud. You're making this into something it's not. She's scared to use the stove, Mark. She's exhausted. This isn't okay." The line went dead. He'd hung up on me. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then looked at Sarah, who was still pushing her pancakes around her plate. My daughter, my beautiful, kind-hearted daughter, who was being taken advantage of by the very people who should have been protecting her. After a few days, the situation became even more complicated. I was in the middle of reviewing quarterly reports at work when my phone rang. Seeing it was Sarah's school, my heart immediately jumped into my throat. "Mrs. Mitchell?" It was Mrs. Henderson, Sarah's homeroom teacher. "I needed to talk to you about Sarah's performance lately." I gripped my pen tighter. "Is everything okay?" "Well, that's just it. Sarah's grades have dropped significantly in the past month. She's falling asleep in class, her homework is often incomplete, and she seems exhausted. I know she's always been a good student, which is why this change is concerning. Is everything all right at home?" My pen snapped in half. "Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Henderson. I'm aware of the situation and working on it." The moment I hung up, I tried calling Mark. Straight to voicemail. I sent him a text, "We need to talk about Sarah. Her grades are dropping. Call me ASAP." The little read notification appeared under my message almost immediately, but no response came. Not that day, not the next, not for 2 weeks. When Mark finally showed up at our door for his scheduled time with Sarah, I was ready. "She's not going," I said, blocking the doorway. His face darkened. "Excuse me? You heard me. Her grades are tanking, she's exhausted all the time, and her teacher is worried. This isn't healthy, Mark. You can't do this, he growled. We have a custody agreement. If you violate it, I'll take you to court. Go ahead. I'd love to explain to a judge how you're letting your pregnant wife use our daughter as free household labor. Mark pushed past me into the apartment, his face red with anger. Then his expression suddenly shifted, softening as he spotted Sarah hovering in the hallway. Princess, he said, his voice gentle now. Get your things. Don't worry about what your mom's saying, I promise you won't have to do any more housework. I just miss you, sweetheart. I want to spend time with my girl. I watched Sarah's face, saw her wavering. She looked at me, uncertain. Just a minute, I said, pulling her aside while Mark waited by the door. I knelt down and whispered in her ear, take your phone with you. Turn on the voice recorder app. Record everything that happens there, what Rebecca says to you, what your dad says. It'll be our secret, okay? Sarah's eyes widened slightly, then she gave me a tiny nod. I squeezed her hand and winked. Remember, I whispered. Don't let them know you're recording. This is just between us. She hurried to pack a bag while I stood watching Mark, who was checking his phone and pretending not to be angry. 5 minutes later, Sarah was ready. I hugged her tight before she left, feeling like I was sending my child into battle with nothing but a cell phone for armor. But sometimes the best weapons aren't the ones you can see. That week was torture. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd lunge for it, only to find another short text from Sarah. I'm okay. Everything's fine. Don't worry. But mothers know when something's wrong, and everything in me screamed that things were far from fine. The doorbell rang on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, there stood Sarah, soaking wet, shivering, and alone. Oh my God, I gasped, pulling her inside. Sarah, what happened? How did you get here? I ran away, she whispered, her voice breaking. Took the bus. I looked at her hands as I helped her out of her wet jacket. They were red and raw, with calluses forming on her palms. She could barely keep her eyes open, and when she tried to take off her shoes, she winced in pain. First things first, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Let's get you warm and fed. I made her favorite comfort food, grilled cheese and tomato soup, and watched as she practically inhaled it. Only when she'd finished eating did I dare to ask, what happened, sweetheart? Without a word, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking as she handed it to me. The recordings, she said quietly. Listen. I opened her voice recorder app, and what I heard made my blood run cold. You stupid, clumsy girl, Rebecca's voice crackled through the speaker. Can't you do anything right? Look at these floors, I can still see spots everywhere. I'm trying my best, Sarah's small voice replied. Your best isn't good enough. Do it again. And when you're done, there's laundry to fold and dinner to start. But I'm scared of using the stove. Get out of my sight. Just get out, useless. My hands were shaking as I played recording after recording. Rebecca's voice grew more cruel with each one. You think you're so special? Wait until my baby comes, then you'll really learn what work is. Free babysitter, that's what you'll be. Then came the conversation that broke my heart, Sarah pleading with her father. Dad, please. Rebecca's making me do everything. I'm so tired. Stop lying, Mark's voice was cold, unrecognizable. You're just lazy. Do you know how much money I pay your mother? The least you can do is help around the house. But Dad. Listen to me carefully, his voice dropped to a threatening whisper. If you tell your mother about any of this, I'll take her to court. I'll get full custody, and you'll never see her again. Do you understand? I looked at my daughter, huddled in her chair, and felt a rage I'd never known before. This wasn't just about making a child do chores, this was abuse. Sarah burst into tears, and I held her until she stopped shaking, making promises I intended to keep. I won't let them hurt you anymore, baby. You're safe now. After she calmed down, I called my sister, Amy. I need a favor, I said, explaining the situation. She arrived within 20 minutes. The drive to Mark's house was a blur of rage and adrenaline. I jabbed the doorbell repeatedly until he yanked the door open. What the hell are you? I pushed past him into the foyer. Where is she? He demanded. Sarah ran away, and I know you put her up to it. This is your fault, Jenna. You've spoiled her rotten, letting her do whatever she wants. Rebecca waddled up behind him, one hand protectively over her swollen belly. She nodded along with Mark's words, playing the perfect supportive wife. You're the one who's turned her into a spoiled brat, Mark continued. She thinks she's too good to help around the house. Bullied her, I cut in, my voice ice cold. You both bullied my 12-year-old daughter. They exchanged a look before breaking into dismissive laughter. Oh, please, Rebecca rolled her eyes. Sarah has quite an imagination. She's always making up stories. I pulled out my phone. Really? Making up stories like this? I pressed play. Rebecca's voice filled the room. You stupid, clumsy girl. Can't you do anything right? Their faces went slack with shock. I played more, Mark's threats about court, Rebecca's cruel words about using Sarah as a babysitter, all of it. Mark recovered first, his face turning ugly. You think this changes anything? I have expensive lawyers. The best in the state. They'll tear you apart. You're hurting me, Rebecca suddenly shrieked, clutching her belly. Your fighting is stressing me out. I just wanted your daughter to help me. I turned to her, feeling oddly calm, despite my rage. If you want to raise a maid so badly, wait for your own child. My daughter isn't your servant. Her face flushed red as she sputtered in outrage. Finally, I faced Mark. You know what's really pathetic? Not that you left me, that hurt, but I got over it. What's pathetic is that you failed the one person you never should have failed. You stood there and let your wife abuse our daughter. You even helped her do it. What kind of father does that make you? I didn't wait for an answer. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving them standing in their perfect house with their perfect lawn. They could keep it all. I had something far more precious to protect. The next morning, I called the best family law attorney I could find, Linda Stevenson. The legal battle was exhausting. Mark's expensive lawyers painted me as a vindictive ex-wife, trying to poison my daughter against her father and his new family. They claimed I was cruel for not letting Sarah bond with her pregnant stepmother, that I was jealous of their perfect new life, that I was using Sarah as a weapon in my revenge against Mark. But then we played the recordings in court. I watched the judge's face darken as she listened to Rebecca berating Sarah, to Mark threatening our daughter, to their casual cruelty. The courtroom fell silent except for those damning voices coming through the speakers. Even Mark's fancy lawyers couldn't explain away their own recorded words. Sarah was brave enough to testify too. She sat in that witness chair, looking so small, but speaking with such clarity about what had happened. I saw several jury members wipe away tears as she described being afraid to use the stove but being forced to cook anyway, about how her hands hurt from scrubbing floors, about how she'd fallen asleep in class because she was so exhausted from all the housework. When the verdict came down, it was decisive. The judge granted me full custody, with Mark losing all visitation rights unless I explicitly permitted them. He would still have to pay child support, but he had no legal right to see Sarah without my approval. Mark exploded when the verdict was read. He stormed up to me outside the courtroom, his face red with rage. Happy now? He spat. This is what you wanted all along, isn't it? Revenge because I left you for Rebecca? I looked at him calmly, feeling nothing but pity. You really don't get it, do you? This was never about us. This was about Sarah. But congratulations, Mark, you found yourself the perfect partner. She's just as cruel and manipulative as you are. You deserve each other. That was the last real conversation we ever had. Months passed. Sarah's grades improved dramatically once she wasn't exhausted from being treated like a servant. Her smile came back, and her laugh, that beautiful laugh that used to annoy Rebecca so much, filled our home again. We heard through mutual friends that Rebecca had given birth to a son. Mark sent a few texts asking to see Sarah, but they were half-hearted at best, and stopped entirely after a while. Sometimes I wondered if he ever truly understood what he'd lost, not just his daughter, but the chance to be the father she deserved. Sarah's 14 now, and the other day I overheard her talking to her best friend about the whole situation. "Aren't you sad about not seeing your dad?" her friend asked. "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "But not seeing him is better than being treated like I'm worthless. Besides, I have the best mom in the world." I often look out the window, thinking about how far we'd come. The apartment might not be as fancy as Mark's big house, and we might not have expensive cars or yachts, but we have something much more valuable: peace, love, and respect. Sarah doesn't have to fear walking into her own home anymore. She doesn't have to be anyone's servant or scapegoat. She can just be herself, a bright, funny, kind-hearted teenager who deserves every happiness in the world. As for me, I've learned that sometimes the happy ending isn't the one you imagined. Sometimes it's better. Sometimes it's just a mom and her daughter, making pancakes on Saturday mornings, watching movies together, and filling their home with laughter that's as loud as they want it to be.